Alright guys, let's take a look at our next problem. Now over here they're saying name some of the following compounds. So we got to name all of these guys over here. Now even though this course is all multiple choice, this is one area of the course that requires a little bit of theory that we need to understand so that we can actually solve those multiple choice questions properly. So in order to name things, remember that we have to first take each one of these and classify them as being one of these three cases. So our first case would be a metal combining with a non-metal. Our second case would be a non-metal combination. And lastly, polyatomic. If we take a closer look at each one of these guys, you will notice that every single element present over here happens to be on the right side of the periodic table, right? It's to the right of the metalloids that we discussed earlier, which makes them nonmetals. So when you have a non-metal scenario, here are the rules that we need to be aware of. So the template for naming this guy is as follows. It's you take some prefix, add the non-metal, prefix, non-metal, and then you add the suffix "-ide". This seems really complicated, but take a look at how simple this really is. When we're talking about prefixes, we have to kind of count in chemistry. From 1 to 10, that's like saying mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octo, nona, deca. This is something we kind of learned in grade school. I don't know if you guys remember, pentagons and octagons and so on. And it's coming back here. So this is what we mean by prefixes. So for instance, if I have P2O5, the prefix for the first one would be 2, or in our case, di. 5 is penta. So those are the two prefixes you see here. So let's try to follow this template for P2O5. So 2, di. Now you name the nonmetal. P stands for phosphorus. So diphosphorus. Penta, oxygen. But to oxygen, you have to slap on that suffix "-ide until it basically sounds good to your ear. So if it was oxygen, it would be oxide, or carbide, or sulfide, or fluoride, chloride, and so on and so forth. So that's essentially it. Diphosphorus, not pentoxygen, but pentoxide. And that's how you name nonmetals, or two nonmetals. This being said, you should also know that there's one tiny little exception to the rule. It turns out that if your first element has a 1 associated with it, if you have only one of them, then you omit the mono that would have been there. And you guys kind of already know this, right? If I asked you, what is CO2? You don't say monocarbon dioxide, right? You say carbon dioxide. So that's the idea here. CO, both of these are nonmetals. So one CO, one O would be carbon monoxide and not monocarbon monoxide. If you keep this in mind, you should be good to answer the questions over here. So let's take a look at each one of these 5 individually. So we have P2O6. The first thing we're going to do is classify this, locate your P and the O on the periodic table, and convince yourself that these are both nonmetals. Of course, the names are going to be given to you, so you don't have to memorize them. And we kind of saw an example similar to this. So this is going to be diphosphorus, and 6 is hexa, so hexa oxide, or hexoxide, probably. Now don't worry if you don't know how to name these. Remember, your test is going to be multiple choice, right? So the name is going to be supplied to you. Let's practice this a couple more times. So over here we have 5 nitrogens and 3 sulfurs. Both of these are nonmetals, and 5 is penta. So remember, prefix, penta. Then name the first nonmetal, nitrogen. Again, let's do this properly. So pentanitrogen. And trisulfide. So 3 would be tri, and sulfur with an "-ide" slapped on would be sulfide. Let's move on. So CF7, now I have 1 C and 7 Fs. So 1 would be mono, but since you're starting with mono, you will omit that. So this will not be mono carbon, and 7 would be hepta. So normally this is what your head says, but remember you can never start with mono. So the answer is only carbon heptafluoride. Now if we continue this trend over here and over here, for example, this would be monocarbon tetrahydride, dihydrogen dioxide. These would be marked incorrect, simply because there are certain molecules like H2O that are special enough to have their own name. You would call this water and not dihydrogen monoxide. Similarly, there are certain other ones in the list that you have in your notes that you straight up have to memorize. For example, CH4, guys, is methane. And again, not monocarbon tetrahydride. Similarly, H2O2 is also special enough to have its own name. We call this guy hydrogen peroxide. And of course, there's a handful of other ones that you should know, and they're in the list in your notes in front of you. So hopefully this shows you how to answer or name compounds of case 2. Let's move on and take a look at problems from case 3.